Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Dear brothers and sisters, welcome back to the series. I am exploring big personalities of the past in Islamic history, and there's thousands of names to uncover, but we're trying to dig deep in some of those. And one of the ones I had, and I wanted to go back to one of the first generations really, and cover Ibn Abbas radiallahu ta'ala an. And Sheikh, I know he was a cousin of the Prophet ﷺ, and the Prophet ﷺ made dua for Ibn Abbas to become someone of the Quran, and that to benefit him. But what are the finer details that made the man?
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. So, Brother Hisham, so many of these names that we've been considering and examining, there's something which kind of knits it all together. Each one of these individuals would ultimately have been looking back to their past. And they always had this decision, this choice to be making themselves. Do we say this is something of the past only, and therefore, those efforts were relevant then to kind of engage intellectually and using their capabilities, their intelligence to try and develop understanding for themselves, their families, their communities, or not? Do they say it's for then only and not for now, or was it for then and now also to be re-examined and reconsidered for our times and places as well? And each one of them, invariably, for them to have become what they became, for them to have served in the way that they did serve. So they were answering that same question in actually the same way. Ultimately, when the Prophet ﷺ passed away, Ibn Abbas, he had already heard of the Prophet ﷺ making that dua for him. That famous dua where the Prophet ﷺ said to him, Allahumma, or he prayed to Allah about Ibn Abbas, saying, Allahumma faqihu fi din wa allimhu ta'wil. Oh Allah, grant him the understanding of the religion and teach him the knowledge of Islam. But Ibn Abbas was a youngster at the time, and yes, he accompanied the Prophet ﷺ once, riding behind him, and the Prophet ﷺ called out to him saying, Ya ghulam, inni u'allimuka kalimat, I'm about to teach you some words, young man, so remember them. You will preserve Allah in your life and He will preserve you, obey Him, and then, you'll find Him before you at every turn, etc. He also stayed with the Prophet ﷺ overnight on one or two occasions. But really, when the Prophet ﷺ passed away, he himself, Ibn Abbas, was a young man, 13 years of age.
Wow, he was pretty young.
A teenager just. And at that ripe, tender age, he sat down and he was sat with one of his friends. They're perhaps just in essence chilling. So he asked his friend when the Prophet ﷺ had passed away, he said to him, the Prophet Muhammad has passed away, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and it falls to us in a way to perhaps learn, study, so that we can also one day carry on teaching. And his friend, almost in contrast to Ibn Abbas, he couldn't imagine the situation where a future would arise where he would need to be teaching and disseminating the message. He said, right now, Abu Bakr and Umar, Uthman and Ali, others who are elder Sahaba, Ibn Mas'ud, all of them are present. Why would we ever need to be teaching? So in essence, at that point, they ended up choosing two different paths, both observant, practicing, devoted Muslims, no doubt. However, Ibn Abbas could see, in essence, like that future where there would be a need. And to prepare himself for that need, he attended the classes, he put in the time and the effort. It was in the sense that, I might be important one day, but actually if the opportunity presents itself, or the need presents itself rather, then there should be capacity which exists, which can fill that need, can answer that call, so to speak, and which can address that issue or that challenge and provide solutions. And so he didn't rely on the fact that he knew the Prophet ﷺ had made this supplication, invoking Allah to bless Ibn Abbas and confer his, sacred sciences and knowledge to him. Yeah. He knew that dua only meant that it will be facilitated for him to do that.
He has to put in the legwork.
It's about attending the classes of Zayd ibn Thabit, or elder Sahaba such as Zayd ibn Thabit. And so it's recorded in the books of history that Ibn Abbas would go sometimes just before the noon prayer in the middle of Medina, almost like a desert in essence in the terms of the heat. And he'd be sat outside near his door, and sometimes there'll be almost a sandstorm that's kind of raging on, and he's covering himself and trying to protect himself from the elements out there. And then Zayd would, emerge round about as the adhan is called to go to the mosque, the Masjid Nabawi. And he'd see Ibn Abbas and say, Yabna Ammi Rasulullah, oh cousin of the Messenger of God, why didn't you call me? I would have come to you. And he said, no, knowledge is to be traveled to. It's not meant to come to you. Right? And he'd show great acts of humility and service to Ibn Abbas, even though Ibn Abbas was from the family of the Prophet. Right? But Zayd ibn Thabit was his teacher, his source of knowledge, or one of his sources of knowledge. He took it seriously and he invested his efforts in trying to learn from all those senior Sahaba, those companions of the Prophet ﷺ. And it came to great use afterwards. Sure enough, the Sahaba, the elder ones, gradually they were to pass away. And Ibn Abbas was to then, as Ibn Mas'ud said, he, in his own life, Ibn Mas'ud's life said, if this young man, pointing to Ibn Abbas, he's already learned so much. Should he grow up to, my age or a similar age, he's referring to himself, then he will be a huge container of knowledge. And during the life of Umar al-Khattab, when Umar was the caliph at the time, he would include Ibn Abbas in his gatherings. Ibn Abbas was still a young man, and there were some older people there, and they said, why is this youngster there? And Ibn Abbas again, he said, one day Umar asked, do you know the backdrop and the background for the revelation of Surah Al-Nasr, إِذَا جَاءَ نَصْرُ اللَّهِ وَالْفَتْحِ? And do you know its meanings? They all gave their suggested understandings. Then he turned to Ibn Abbas, and Ibn Abbas responded by saying, I believe the understanding of this surah is that it was giving notice of the fact that of the imminence of the Prophet Muhammad's passing away. Because it's saying that in essence, his job, his mission has been completed. And Umar turned to them and said, I know of no other interpretation except for this one. Again, highlighting from a young age, Ibn Abbas's understanding was something which was quite profound, and he was way above his age because he put in that effort. And later on, he'd have these gatherings and classes, and outside his house and in his house, and it would be filled. There would literally be people out onto the streets coming day by day to study different aspects, sometimes some of the hadith, some of the Quran. One of his students, Mujahid ibn Jabal, recited the Quran to Ibn Abbas, seeking the tafsir of each ayah 30 times. Wow. 30. Again, showing both the discipline of soul that he himself had and that he instilled to his mentees, to those whom he was mentoring. And later on, when the fitna of the Khawarij was to emerge, this is the first kind of breakaway splinter group. There was like an extremist group of the time. And he was then sent by the caliph of the time, the Amir of Mu'min of the time, to deal with extremism. And he went to them and said, suffice an argument against you is you don't have a single companion amongst your midst. And they were to quote ayat of the Quran saying, but Allah says, in al-hukmu illa lillah, that governance only belongs to God, the right of that. And he said, kalimatul haqq, kalimatu haqqin urida bil batil. He said, a word is truth. But which is true in its wording, but its intent and its usage, the way you're deploying it, is incorrect and misguided. And so again, you saw the fact was that the needs of the time were to be met through knowledge itself. And Ibn Abbas saw that, and he sought to address it through his efforts. And so really the lesson we learn from all of these luminaries is that it's effort along with intentions and of course with supplications that really makes the difference. We need to do our part, and every one of us in the community needs to also play their role as well. I'm reminded of the poetry of some of the poets of the past. And so in this poem by Ash-Shafi'i rahimahullah ta'ala, Imam Ash-Shafi'i, he says, بِقَدْرِ الْكَدِّ تُكْتَسَبُ الْمَعَالِي ومن طلب العلا سهر الليالي ومن رام العلا من غير كد أضاع العمر في طلب المحال تروم العزة ثم تنام ليلا يغوص البحر من طلب اللآلي. The meaning of it is, in the realm of effort, heights unfold, seeking greatness through vigilant nights, we're told. Whoever aspires to soar without earnest endeavor wastes life chasing what's unattainable forever. You seek glory, but in the night you repose and sleep. Only the pearl seeker into the depths goes deep. And so he was clearly saying that if you want to come out with that pearl, you need to be willing to dive deep. And as Iqbal mentioned in his poetry, he said in a mixture of Urdu and Farsi, Persian, he said, अपने मन में डूब कर पाजा सुराग जिंदगी तो अगर मेरा नहीं बनता ना बन अपना तो बन, saying that if you don't want to follow me, you don't need to follow me, but at least follow your own true potential. And lastly, as Al-Farazdak, the famous poet from the Abbasid dynasty's time, said, أولئك أجدادي. About all of these people, this poem really rings true. He says, أولئك آبائي فجئني بمثلهم يا جرير إذا جمعتنا المجامع. He says that these people I've mentioned, these are my fathers, these are my spiritual forebearers. So bring to me someone equivalent to any of these when we meet next. He set out this challenge saying, these are people of true nobility and quality. So let's try and recognize that quality and inculcate some of those traits within our own efforts as well.